What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Zero Missing. Today we're going to be talking about a murder mystery that's over 110 years old, almost, right after this. Well, guys, today's murder mystery story comes to us via Villisca, Iowa. Villisca, Iowa, not a very large community. In those days, it was about 2,000 people. And I think these days, it's pretty much still about 2,000 people. So it's not this highly populated metropolis. I'm going to show you guys a picture over here real quick so you can get an idea of how far away this is from any type of major metropolitan area. Villisca, Iowa is the definition of a sleepy Midwest town. Very small community, close-knit community. And something happened so gruesome that it actually took the Titanic off of the front page. The Villisca Axe Murders are renowned, and pretty much every paranormal investigator you can think of has been out there and seen and walked this place. Now, I've been there myself. It's not huge. This place is only probably about 700, maybe 800 square feet total. There's 2 rooms upstairs, plus an attic, and there's a small closet. Very small staircase, and the downstairs consists of a kitchen, a back room, and a living room with a fireplace. Obviously, in those days, they didn't have indoor plumbing, so there's no plumbing there. So there was no bathroom anywhere. There was a cellar, but it wasn't connected to the inside of the house. You had to go outside to go under the house to get down to it. And I can tell you, when you walk in this place, you absolutely kind of get this overwhelming feeling of dread. It feels like someone lays a wet blanket on you. This really has been reported by pretty much everybody who's visited the place. So still a lot of activity in that house, and some people believe that all 8 spirits of those people are still there. So we'll get into the story real quick. So this happened back in June, I believe 10th, 1912, a little after midnight. Well, back up a little bit. The Moore family had just left a church function, came home, and the 2 children's friends, Lena and Isla Stillinger, came home with them to spend the night. And they got home, some reports around 10 o'clock. Kids were all tired, parents tired, so they go to bed. Sometime around midnight, this murder happens. Now, they believe that the murderer had lie in wait in the attic, which was attached to a little bitty area, kind of almost like a small hallway between the upstairs parents' bedroom and the children's bedroom. Again, these areas upstairs are not large at all, probably maybe 250 square feet total, pretty small. They believe that the father, Josiah Moore, was murdered first. He was also the only one that was hit with the sharp edge of the axe. We think this kind of points to what may have caused this whole situation to kind of happen. We believe that may have had some effect on the original reasoning for the murder. And we'll get into that here in a minute as well. Josiah Moore, 43, wife Sarah, 39. The kids' names were Herman, Paul, Catherine, and Boyd, ages 11, 10, 7, and 5. And Lena and Ina Stillinger were 9 and 12. So pretty much all the same age group. I can imagine having a house full of 6 kids at that age was a bit much. So going to bed would have been some peace and quiet. They believe sometime around midnight, the killer snuck out of the attic. They believe he was hiding in the attic because they found spent cigarette butts in there, which would have been unusual for the Moore family to actually smoke in the house. Typically would have been something that would have been done outside. This was an absolute brutal murder. They believe that Josiah was hit 30 plus times. And there were actually gouge marks in the ceiling over the bed where Josiah Moore and Sarah Moore lay. There was blood spatters on the roof, on the walls, on the ceiling, not the roof, but on the ceiling. And it was a very gruesome scene. In order for someone to swing an axe over 30 times, you'd have to be a pretty fairly in shape kind of guy. And that'll play into it here in a minute. I just want to make sure we don't get away from it. Now, also keep in fact that nobody in the house woke up. Everybody was found in their bed. Only one person is believed to have woken up, which was, I believe, Lena Stillinger, because she had some defensive wounds on her arm. A small cut, so they think that maybe she raised her hand. No way to know for sure. But everyone except for Josiah was hit with the blunt end of the axe. So kind of unusual, just a different feature to the murders, and we'll explain why that's important here in a little bit as well. After he was done, he didn't just leave. The murderer didn't leave. He went downstairs and washed his hands, covered all the windows with some type of cloth, clothing, sheets, blankets, whatever he could find. Mirrors were also covered, which was a bit unusual. They also found a lamp at the foot of the bed of Josiah and Sarah Moore, which would have been right at the top of the stairs. And if you've been there, you'd understand it is, when you walk to the top of the stairs, there's not a lot of room. There's not a lot of room at all. So you don't have the ability to just, I'll walk over to the bed and set the lamp down. It basically was sat right there, and the wick was turned all the way down. And old kerosene lamps, or oil lamps, you have this base lamp at the bottom. It's kind of a container, and then it has a glass globe that goes over the top. But on the side of this, it has a twistable kerosene wick that you turn it up and light it, and then you turn it down so that you don't have as much flame. There's been some theories that possibly the Moore family had been drugged of some type so that they would sleep harder. But it's certainly very unusual that someone would be able to commit this kinds of acts of violence in such close proximity to everybody around him and no one wakes up. Now, in the case of one of the Stillinger girls, the one that had the defensive wound, her underwear had actually been pulled, or undergarments, they say, had been pulled halfway down. Coroner said, autopsy report said that she actually had been assaulted in that way. So, but that's also going to play a part here as well. Sometime around 5 a.m., they think the killer had washed his hands there. He left the axe there. And then they think that he took the keys for some reason. All the doors were locked, and he left the home. Now, their next door neighbor, who normally sees them first thing in the morning, it's a very busy house. They have 4 kids, they have chickens, they have horses. She didn't see anything around 7 o'clock. She kind of got a little concerned. She walks over, she knocks on the door, nobody comes to the door, tries to look in the window, doesn't see anything. For obvious reasons, they're all blocked. So after she didn't see anything, she telephoned Joe's brother Ross and asked him to come check it out. They say Ross had a key, but some people say there was just a key on his keychain that actually opened the front door. These were not terribly sophisticated locks back then. And he entered the house before he came rushing out again, saying they needed a marshal. Marshal comes out, Hank Horton, and goes sees what's going on. They call a doctor. The doctor goes in, sees it, obviously pronounces everybody dead. And then in the process of all this going on, over 100 people ended up walking through this crime scene, absolutely destroying any type of residual evidence. Other than the axe being there, there's 2 pounds of bacon for some reason they got left on the floor. A small chain that didn't belong to the Moores was there. Just extremely unusual. At this point, they have no idea what has happened, why it happened, who did it, but it doesn't take long before a list of suspects starts popping up. Now, one of those suspects is Senator Frank Jones, Iowa Senator Frank Jones. Now, Frank Jones was a prominent business owner in the community. He actually owned the local John Deere franchise dealership. Josiah Moore had worked for him for quite some time, and eventually Josiah ended up leaving and opening his own farmer dealership, taking the John Deere dealership with him. Now, obviously, you can see how that would cause a bit of rub. This is a small town. There's not a lot of business to start with. That's a pretty clear motive, or one would say a clear motive for murder. Now, this was investigated at the time by a gentleman by the name of Detective Wilkerson of the Burns Detective Agency, which was pretty well renowned at the time for being able to get out to the bottom of things. He accused Frank and his son of hiring William Blackie Mansfield to kill Joe Moore. Apparently, Blackie Mansfield had an airtight alibi. He was in another area, has payroll that says that he was in that area working. A lot of people believed that that document was forged, and it would be difficult to prove that it wasn't. But at first, no documentation was presented. William Blackie Mansfield actually ends up suing the detectives, I believe, and walks away with like $2,500 for falsely accusing him. Let me back up to Frank Jones, the Iowa senator. Frank Jones, his daughter-in-law, her name was Donna. Donna was pretty easy on the eyes, especially for back in those days. So it was not uncommon for her to have her choice of suitors. You can see how Josiah Moore, being a prominent business owner, and if she's looking to get back at Frank Jones's, you can see how there would be a lot of implications here as to how this could pan out. So she was accused of having an affair with this young lady. Not a lot of evidence on that, but you can see how it just kind of adds to the overall not looking good for Frank Jones. Well, then we get into another gentleman here, a guy by the name of Reverend George Kelly. He was a pastor, a traveling preacher. He had actually been at the church that night, at the children's activities that night. Some people think that he followed the Moores home and that he did this, especially since he actually confessed to the crime. Now, while he did confess to the crime, he later recanted and said the only reason he confessed was because of police brutality. There's some things that would make you want to say that Reverend George Kelly might be the guy. One of them is that George Kelly's left-handed, or was left-handed, and the marks in the ceiling was determined by the coroner to be created by a left-handed person. A right-handed person typically holds their axe crossbody this way. A left-handed person would hold them this way, so when the axe goes up, it's going to go over your right shoulder, or vice versa, depending on which hand you are. Now, that would seem to implicate a little bit, and there's a little more that implicates him. He was a traveling preacher, but he was also a known sexual deviant and had been caught peeping in windows 2 days before the murders. He also had took out an article in the Omaha World-Herald for a girl stenographer for confidential work, and candidate must be willing to pose as a model. Jessamine Hodgson had applied for the job, and she received a pretty intense letter back from George Reverend Kelly stating that she would have to perform in the nude. But the letter didn't stop there. The letter was submitted evidence, and the judge read it, but not out loud. He said that this was so obscene, lewd, lascivious, and filthy as to be offensive to this honorable court, and improper to spread upon the record thereof. That must have been pretty intense. By the way, the article for the Omaha World-Herald, you can still find that article today, the original posting, a clipping of it, you can go find that. So this isn't looking too good for Reverend George Kelly. Now, 5 years later, he was continue to investigate this, 5 years later, there was a couple on a train at 5:19 a.m. in the morning, the train that left Villisca, and said that he told them about some gruesome murders that had been committed in town at 5:19 in the morning. Well, the problem is the bodies weren't discovered until 8 a.m. ish. 3 hours later. How would he have possibly have known? Now, it also turns out that Reverend George Kelly had returned to Villisca a week later and shown great interest in the murder, even posing as a Scotland Yard detective to obtain a tour of the Moore house. He was arrested in 1917 and was repeatedly interrogated, and eventually signed another confession that said, and I quote, "I killed the children upstairs first and the children downstairs last. I knew God wanted me to do it this way. Slay utterly came to mind. I picked up the axe, went into the house, and killed them." He then recanted. The couple who claimed to have spoken to him on the morning after the murders changed their stories. So these things don't look good. Now, you also need to keep in mind that while these things don't look good, this is not the first time that Kelly had been in trouble with the law. Kelly was a little bit older. Not to mention that he was 5'2", 119 pounds, and at the time would have been around 57 years old. Not the size and frame of a guy who's going to be able to swing an axe repeatedly and then manage to escape. There was another piece of evidence, the fact that he had sent a bloodied shirt to be laundered in Macedonia, which is not terribly far from Villisca. So this goes back and forth. You can see how there's some bad stuff and there's some good stuff as far as incriminating evidence. But at the end of the day, even though he confessed to the murders, they believe it was induced by basically the police brutality. The first grand jury against Kelly to hear his case resulted in a hung jury 11-1 in favor of refusing to indict him, and a second panel freed him entirely. So then there's that. Now there is another guy in the story here. We're going to talk about the Blackie Mansfield. We kind of talked about him a little bit, but he really didn't fit the bill. Now there is another guy here, and in my personal opinion, this seems to fit most likely to be the person who actually committed the murder. It's a guy by the name of Henry Lee Moore, who is of no relation to Josiah Moore. This is a pretty intense individual here. Convicted axe murderer Henry Lee Moore was the suspect of an investigation conducted by Special Justice Agent Matthew McClary, who believed that he committed a total of nearly 30 similar murders across the Midwest from 1911 to 1912. There is multiple cases that show where he basically did the exact same thing at about 5 different places. So Henry Lee in 1900 was living with a family in Franklin County, Iowa, working as a farmhand. They think he knocked up the young daughter of the farmer. He was sentenced to the Kansas State Reformatory on a forgery charge and released in April 11th of 1911, which is roughly a year before the Villisca murders. There was what they call the Colorado Horror. The murders in Colorado Springs occurred in September the same year. So April, May, June, July, August, September, 4 or 5 months later, these murders basically happened the exact same fashion. Killed pretty much identically the same way. It's way too similar. During the Villisca investigation, other axe murders also came to light just 9 months before the crime in Villisca. H.C. Wayne, his wife, a child, Mrs. A.J. Burnham and 2 children were bludgeoned to death with an axe in Colorado Springs, Colorado. A month later, in October 1911, a family was killed in Monmouth Springs, and just a week later after that, 5 members of a family in Ellsworth, Kansas were murdered as they slept. Just a week before the killing of the Moores and Stillingers in Villisca, a man and his wife were killed in Paola, Kansas, and the similarities were striking. All of them had the faces covered, all of them had the mirrors covered, all of them had used an axe in the same fashion, all of them had locked all of the doors, and all of them had a window left open for the killer to get out of. And every one of them had had a lamp left turned down on the floor somewhere. So it's really, really interesting how all of that turned out, and all of them had wiped down had wiped down the axe and removed stains from their hands and clothing. All of this was identical, all of these. Now, he is convicted of 25 axe murders. He served 36 years of a life sentence before being paroled by the governor of Missouri in 1949. He commuted his sentence in 1956, and Henry Moore was 82 years old and living at the Salvation Army in St. Louis. It's unknown when he died or where he was living at this time. So in 1956, he was 82 years old. He would obviously be over 150 now. So pretty sure he's passed away. But this guy kind of came and went with the breeze. He had no family members to speak of. Just kind of a guy who blew into town. Now, between the Frank Jones, Reverend Kelly, Blackie Mansfield, and Henry Moore, you would seem to think that that would be it, but there's not. There is Andy Sawyer, who just kind of muttered to himself all the time, who confessed that he did it. Another guy, Joe Ricks, arrived by train in Monmouth, Illinois, wearing shoes covered in blood. He was investigated, but they didn't find anything with him. There's been confessions by other people who were on their deathbed in Red Oak, which is not terribly far from Villisca. Clergyman said the man told him he was living in Villisca at the time of the murder, and that he formerly had engaged in the blacksmith business there. He said to have been a part owner of the blacksmith shop. And on his deathbed, he confessed to killing these people. That's pretty intense. Why would somebody just randomly confess to a murder that's 5 years old for no reason? Nobody ever would have found out. This guy apparently was about 25 years old. So, yeah, what do you say? A Detroit prisoner says he did it, and that he killed the woman, the wife, and 4 kids in 1912. This mystery goes on and on and on, and just when you think you get to a dead end, it's not. There's even more to it. Now, if you really want to take a look, you can actually go to villiscaiowa.com, and you can pull up the evidence across all of these. You can look at the police reports, the interrogation reports. You can talk from them talking to everybody. They still have the axe in a museum in Iowa with the original evidence stamp on it. So, I mean, it is absolutely incredible. Now, Villisca, Iowa, I don't know if now, but years ago, you used to be able to tour it. You could even pay enough and you could spend the night. Numerous reportings of hauntings, people rolling balls coming back to them, EVPs, the whole gambit. If you're into that sort of thing. But as far as the actual murders go, I think most likely Henry Lee Moore was the guy who did it. So, well, guys, if you're looking for a really interesting murder mystery, you can dig into this, and they're still trying to figure out who it was to this day. And it's actually remarkable how well the crime scene was destroyed, but how well the documentation has held up over time, and the depths that people have went to try and find out how this happened. This is a very small community still, even to this day, and this is literally a murder that has sent echoes through a century and a half. So, well, guys, that's pretty much it for today. Really appreciate you guys being here. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll have another video up soon. See ya.